Be strong.
Returning to the present, Li-Han crossed his arms over his chest, sincerely apologizing for the unfortunate accident just now, all due to the summons acting on their own. After hearing this, his friend Guy Nandu pouted and called him by name. It turned out that the magician student had already left. Li-Han felt a bit sad when he saw that, but it didn't last long. After a while of walking, the two students arrived in front of the ceremonial hall, where Professor Milia worked. Seeing no one to guide them, the two boys just walked in. Guy Nandu nervously looked everywhere. Li-Han similarly observed the scene here, then was surprised because it was completely different from the Shadow Court. Here, there is also a toxic lake. Two students walked to a door and raised their hands to knock. Without waiting for the person inside to agree, Li-Han opened the door and walked in, but did not forget to apologize to Professor Milii for being late for some personal matter. In this large library-like room, there was only one woman sitting there reading a book attentively. When the woman saw him coming, she looked at him with dissatisfied and annoyed eyes and said that if he had something to do, then it couldn't be helped, there was no need. After hearing what she said, Li-Han and Guy Nandu froze for a moment. Seeing the two of them just standing there, they had to apologize. After that, he didn't look at Li-Han anymore and returned to his work, but Li-Han was not that calm. He was confused when he saw that Professor Milia was not surprised to see him present. Questions began to arise in Li-Han's mind. He wondered if Professor Mortem had told the other professors that he would become his disciple, warning no one to touch him. It was very possible, happen. Unlike Li-Han, who stood still, Guy Nandu began to walk around and observe. Looking everywhere and seeing no one, he went to ask the professor where his friends were here first. The professor simply replied that they had class, so they had gone home to do their homework. Hearing that, Guy Nandu gently breathed out a breath. The word successful homework shocked Guy Nandu. He couldn't help but ask again, "Homework? You already have a bunch of homework from other classes." After hearing that, Professor Milia rubbed his forehead. After hearing this, Professor Milia did not say anything but raised his hand and flicked it. Following that snap, two floating books appeared in front of the two people. The book that fell into Li-Han's hands was a book about the basic theory and application of summoning magic. Then two tables appeared. Professor Milii asked Li-Han and Guy Nandu to sit down there. After the two sat down, Professor Milii began asking them to read the book, mark it, then answer the question. Li-Han also listened and began to open the book. The book opens prominently with the title, Questions about Application, Principles and Practice. Li-Han squinted his eyes and read each word thoughtfully. The more he read, the more he realized that this was a good book. Even though he had seen all kinds of textbooks about his major before, this one was much easier to understand. Most books in Li-Han's eyes are evil things. Their only goal is to waste Li-Han's time. But this book is different. Li-Han feels like it is reminding him to read slowly. He will gradually understand and remember the basic knowledge. Thanks to that book, Li-Han's impression of Professor Milii was better. She was a great professor. However, his starry eyes made her feel a little shy, not understanding why Li-Han looked at himself like that. Guy Nandu collapsed in front of the book. He lowered his head and groaned that he missed Professor Mortem. Professor Milii, even though he looked at him like that, was still very surprised. Normally, this type of teaching would make students angry, complaining, especially these kids. However, the student she thought would be the most arrogant quietly followed instructions. She started to remember what Garcia Kim told her. She said Li-Han wasn't like that. A decision was made. She decided to pay attention to this Li-Han a little more. On the shelves are neatly arranged books. Finally the class ended. Professor Milii said that's it for today, followed by a stack of papers placed down firmly. Seeing that the two of them were bored looking at the thick stack of papers, Professor Milii finally told them to remember to read and study all of these books next week. Li-Han and Guy Nandu held hands on the stack of papers. Guy Nandu picked it up and agreed to the professor, but his face showed no regrets. Li-Han looked at his friend like that and immediately knew that Guy Nandu would no longer come to study, and Professor Milii also thought that he would definitely never come back again. Not seeing anything else from her, Li-Han and Guy Nandu turned around and left, not forgetting to see her again at the weekend. She looked at the backs of the two people in silence. After a moment of deciding, she told Li-Han to wait. He also obeyed and stopped. Professor Milii slowly walked out. The first smile appeared on her always serious face. She said sorry for misunderstanding Li-Han, and even promised to see him again next week. As soon as the words finished, the door to the room was closed. Witnessing that scene, Li Han still couldn't understand anything. Suddenly his face became frightened. Li Han began to feel surprised, wondering what the professor had misunderstood about him. In a classroom with two students sitting next to each other in a very awkward atmosphere, the principal spoke up. Li Han and Yoner sat opposite the two students, looking intently at the principal. He said it was time to learn life lessons. After saying that, the principal even raised his tongue to lick his teeth. His face clearly showed evil, asking the students meaningfully, surely they haven't forgotten the homework he assigned, now he wants to look over it together. After listening to Li Han, he was speechless. How could he forget that the principal's homework was to retrieve flags from other towers? Seeing that no one reacted, he finally said he would look at the Xuanvu and Fire Phoenix first. The two female students sitting below exchanged glances and nodded. After that nod, the two people stood up using the table. The two girls stood up, their faces happily expressing how they had exchanged flags peacefully. After listening, the principal also announced that Xuanvu Tower and Hoafuang had completed their homework, but the mirror clearly waved his hands in frustration. The two students below looked at him silently, wondering if he needed to, showing obvious disinterest. After a while, the target finally arrived. The principal asked about Li Han's Dragon Tower. He stood up and announced that his group had also gotten the flag. But using a peaceful method, the principal once again despondently congratulated the Dragon Tower on completing its homework. He flew down with a disappointed face, but his mouth was still praising. Good, good, you did very well, very wonderful. Li Han stood there with a dead fish in his eyes. After thinking about it, the principal turned back, his eyes serious. The students under those attentive eyes also felt startled. His bony face was exaggerated. Calling his Honor Knight students in a friendly voice, the principal asked if they were carrying flags, and the expected answer would be yes. The students sat there listening without saying anything, but their faces turned red. While he was still close to those students, sitting above Li Han felt someone pointing a laser at the back of his neck. Not seeing an answer, he decided to ask again why they didn't bring out the flag, at which point Marathi hesitantly stood up and apologized. In a gloomy mood, he announced that his tower had not been able to get any flags, to which the principal immediately declared that the White Tiger Tower had not completed its homework. Although his face was calm, Marathi's hand clenched into an angry fist. He cursed silently. This would definitely affect his score. In complete contrast to the students, the principal smiled like he had a good time and joked that it seemed like they had failed in their negotiations. On the one hand, Li Han just wanted him to shut up. The principal started preaching about the purpose of this class, which is for everyone to get to know each other and get along at school, but he was very sad because no one understood that. All the students were silent, because he knew he was lying. But it didn't stop there. The principal immediately said that he would make the homework easier to understand this time. Afraid that the students wouldn't understand, he began to explain that if they turned to the west of the academy, the students would see a lake, and those who had seen it knew it was as big as the ocean. The principal continued to speak. In the middle of the lake there was an island. And he hid a ticket that allowed students to go outside the academy on it. Hearing that, all the students seemed to be energized. The girls were surprised. The boys were equally surprised. Their HP bar was fully charged. Their fiery eyes looked at the principal. He didn't find it strange, but just sighed a little. But this time there's something special included. The principal wanted everyone to cooperate and bring it back here to him. That request made the boys depressed. Only the girls were happily chatting with each other. Guy Nandu was so angry that his whole body was shaking. He silently cursed the principal as a damn skeleton. He couldn't hold back any longer and angrily pointed his finger and asked why he had to work with these people. The other party couldn't help but respond, asking Guy Nandu what he was barking at. Back a while ago, the principal had completed the team pairing. Xuanvu and Fire Phoenix would be on the same team. The Azure Dragon and the White Tiger would be on the same team. But he also did not forget to put a barrier in front, depending on whether they wanted to follow instructions or not. The model of the dragon and White Tiger in his hand was broken. Leaving behind only an empty hand, the principal's face filled with murderous intent threatened that if they failed because of that, there would be big consequences. Returning to the present, while the girls were chatting happily and harmoniously, the boys were extremely gloomy and disappointed. Li Han stood looking at everyone, lost their souls, and exclaimed, the atmosphere was so heavy, and if things kept going like this, things would gradually get worse. Unable to leave things like that, Li Han stepped up and said in a flattering voice, Dear friends at the brave White Tiger Tower. He proposed that everyone can ignore all misunderstandings and cooperate, so that honesty can still reach out. But the person over there didn't respond. He criticized this as being more unlikely than the academy collapsing. After hearing it, he argued that it wasn't that bad. The person opposite continued to curse loudly. They got this score because of Li Han. He was surprised he didn't think they were worried about such a score. However, Li Han was still determined. He went forward to explain that it was just a misunderstanding, and advised them to think carefully. Afraid they wouldn't believe him, he began to explain, if the principal taught the class to be able to teach students, would he really give his students an F for just a small mistake? But an F will come if they don't cooperate. Li Han continued to explain, whether they thought, but someone interrupted. From behind a slow figure approached, advising everyone to wake up. The person who came was Marathi. He stood with his arms folded on his hips. Marathi's attitude is extremely bad, advising everyone not to be fooled by Li Han's boneless tongue, because they have never had a good thing happen when they were involved with him. They were even punished because of Li Han, or recently they were secretly attacked. Li Han stood aside and listened without having time to refute anything. Marathi added another question at the end. He asked everyone who thought they tricked Durgu and Enrogo. After that sentence everyone turned around, throwing Li Han a look of hatred. Yoner saw that the situation was not good, walked up and patted his shoulder and shook his head. Unable to do anything else, Li Han can only do that. He called Durgu who was passing by to come closer to him. When he saw that action, he wondered. Even though he didn't understand, Durgu still approached and Li Han raised his hand. Without saying a word, he held him down by the neck, and that made Durgu confused. Then the wand was pressed directly into his face, and Li Han loudly threatened that if he did not cooperate, another tragedy would happen. This time he would drop Durgu into the lake. That action surprised the students at the White Tiger Tower. Yoner behind him did not expect that his friend would do that. And the main character doesn't understand anything. His face was worried. He didn't expect Li Han would choose this despicable way to make everyone cooperate with each other, panicking and asking for help. The students behind saw this and shouted his name in panic. Li Han not only did not let go but also clamped tighter. They awkwardly said they would cooperate, so let Durgu go. Afraid that Li Han wouldn't believe them and even promised honor, after listening he looked at Durgu for a while. Then let him go, not forgetting to give him a slap on the back. He agreed to let it go this time. Before leaving, Li Han gave one last warning, hoping they would be more careful from now on. Durgu returned. Everyone worriedly asked if he was okay, not forgetting to curse Li Han as an evil bastard. Marathi stood still for a moment, still unable to recover. He couldn't believe Li Han would do that. Although there are some complex relationships created in basic magical personality education, that is not the focus. The problem here is due to the tiger's unwillingness to cooperate, the clever transformation between the dragon and the white tiger, between the bird and the turtle. So, Sienna's face is covered with snake skin. She put her hand in front of her chest and sincerely asked Li Han when he would start. He turned half his face back and said he was still thinking. Because the raid on Professor Uregum's laboratory is a truly urgent matter. He closed his eyes thinking that the right moment was very important, making Macon a bit hesitant about suddenly being so formal with Sister Sienna. Put your hand to your mouth to signal Macon to be quiet, if we go there. Narrowing his eyes, he looked through the half-closed door. Professor Uregum has a bushy beard, eyes as bright as car headlights, and is holding a bottle of medicinal herbs standing in front of the door. If this happens, he will probably have nightmares for the next month. It's best to find a doctor, out his schedule without being discovered. There are white hills and mountains of all sizes lying in the distance. The basic horse riding training lesson has come to an end today. Everyone did very well. Image of students standing and talking, including Wardanas and Macon. The professor called behind Wardanas and he turned around to look. Turn around and walk towards her. What's wrong? There's no need to go to the tent today. The professor happily said that she would take her nephew to the market with her. The thunderous news that he would only return tomorrow made his eyes widen. After saying that, the professor left, not forgetting to wave goodbye to him. In his heart, he thought they would leave tonight, so suddenly. Maybe it's just what you mean. This is a rare opportunity, so you have to take the opportunity. He was full of enthusiasm and walked towards Macon. His friends were also there. Macon raised his voice and asked what was going on. He walked straight, wrapping his arms around everyone's neck and whispering something. The time to act has been decided, he said firmly. It was tonight that made Nelia a bit surprised. Tonight. Dalkard pushed his glasses and said it was a bit sudden, but that's fine, then we can rest comfortably on the weekend. Macon stood next to him and said the moment had finally come, but it seemed sharp. These two people's faces were a bit worried about this campaign. Macon was the first to raise his hand, signaling his determination to the end. In the end, all of them were determined to join forces for a peaceful semester without homework. He looked at them and felt bored but couldn't do anything. When did you guys come up with this slogan? There were two types of students. One was the type who had sneaked out many times at night and the other was never. Macon and Nelia chatted loudly while Radford kept staring at something. The three remaining young men stood next to each other. They seemed very scared about this mission. But of course, someone's footsteps gradually appeared. It's Lihan. He is definitely the best type. My friends who will carry out the operation quickly gather here. Perhaps your leadership will make everyone feel more secure for the mission. Sienna walked towards Lihan. Do you know how to open the door of the Horned Beast Tower? Radford's face showed anger, causing Lihan to say, we found a way. Everyone is still watching silently, and soon we will see what we have prepared. Each piece of stone on the wall cracked. A small path opens behind the wall. The wall seems to have just been broken and everyone will enter their campaign. Dalkard and Macon looked at each other with wide eyes. Dalkard pushed her glasses. Almost everyone admired Lihan. This person was truly terrifying. They didn't expect him to prepare to this extent. Lihan's lips moved as if to say something. Then he pointed at the rubble and wondered what that was. Surprising everyone, it turned out that this was not done by you. Sometimes I wonder what kind of person you think I am. Lihan was discouraged by his friend's words. He touched the crack. The original plan was for Radford to unlock the physical lock, and I to unlock the magic. A few small stones fell to the ground, but this is bad. Why is everyone wondering about this statement? The fragment is inside the Horned Beast Tower, meaning someone has entered the tower. We are no exception. Dalkard hid behind a girl. Something that should have been outside had infiltrated the Horned Beast Tower. Those weren't monsters. Dalkard seemed a bit worried. So what should we do? Or should we return here? He lowered his voice slightly. No, there was no way that after coming here, you would just give up and leave. Listen everyone, we didn't secretly infiltrate the Horned Beast Tower, he said, but everyone froze, not understanding what he was saying. A snap of your fingers, from this moment onwards. We are here to stop the summoned monster that has invaded the Horned Beast Tower and protect the professor's precious property, he said with full confidence. We volunteer to act together. Everyone enthusiastically agreed with your opinion. That's great. Having said that, he rushed in there like a gust of wind. He was also bored with how quickly they turned around. Let's go protect the professor's property. Standing with my back against the stone wall, now perhaps the search will be very quick. But I wonder if it's because this place is dark, someone said to Lihan. The darkness adds to the horror. Everyone looked around to see if they could find anything. Lihan held a small chopstick in his hand. As he finished speaking, the light was lowered. It was like a spell. Everyone stood there watching him do it. Don't worry about this. The darkness is not a problem. Walking up the steps, perhaps the real problem is. Turning half of his body towards everyone, he slowly said that we had only visited the first floor. The second floor was a completely unknown area. It makes them even more eager to search. Let's go. He looked at everyone and felt something strange. Even so, even though they followed him, everyone was worried, and he couldn't blame them. However, we can't turn back anymore. If we throw a javelin, we have to follow the javelin. Just one more step will be the second floor. What else will we have to face? It looks normal on the outside, but we can't let our guard down because this place is quite dangerous. He casually waved his hand in the middle of empty space. His face was hit by that light, a bit worried and gloomy, not knowing what was waiting behind. A light of many colors, it was winding, it was attractive as if drawing him into another dimension. That flow of power startled him. Macon walked over to ask him, then said he felt a source of mana power. Perhaps this space itself was filled with mana, maybe it was as he guessed. The attractive force attracted his hand and slowly pushed it deeper. He was transported into another dimension. It was a huge forest with 4 acres of trees and only a small boy in the middle of the forest. He was stuck in the middle of this space. Being a magic that expands space, his words surprised everyone who entered. Sienna was a bit worried. There was a saying that an excellent alchemist must first be an excellent gardening expert. It seemed that the scale of this forest was surprisingly large. Nelia ran over and said there were many types of plants here that she had never known before. Sienna looked around and said I was the same. This is a man-eating plant, a palm tree that can swallow anyone in front of its mouth, but you can also see many types of dangerous plants surrounding it. Fortunately, this is not a dormitory but a factory. That means I don't have to worry about traps like before. He reassured everyone to stay calm and find the path where the professor might have gone. A skeleton hand peeks out from under your shirt, if we can. That skeletal hand poked out. That strange thing created bold footsteps on the ground. This trace was finally discovered by everyone. What a monster. The chatter arose again. Will we ever encounter one? Maybe we should retreat. Nelia came up with an idea that seemed pretty cool. She suggested to Li Han that we follow these footsteps. Monsters have sharp senses, so we must have found a safe place. He completely agreed with her opinion. Receiving approval and praise made her nostrils flare. Li Han waved his hand, signaling everyone to follow him. They kept walking like that, looking around. And as expected, no students were attacked while passing through that road. Although there were no monsters, they probably encountered them. That one snorted a stream of smoke out of its nostrils that was quite dangerous. A cow with 2 large horns, its eyes full of anger emitting a yellow light as if it was unfriendly and intended to attack. Macon thought it was a cow, he added, but it was no ordinary cow. Radford asked him what we should do here, but he had a rather childish thought that the academy was really stupid. The ferocious cow is standing in front of the way to the upper floor. We have to do something if we want to get over those stairs. But there's no need to fight it. It seems like it's still hungry. It'll probably leave after it's full. Macon has a thought that it won't have any effect. That cow continued to graze on the grass, which looked quite appetizing to it. Suddenly it kicked its legs, startled and angry, as if it sensed something. It jumped up, its facial muscles contracted, and the cow's body was filled with murderous intent. Its weight crushed all the plants under its feet. Macon was a little worried about what would happen if the professor saw. Maybe Yanero was right. At this rate, we'll all be in trouble. He held his hands tightly to the ground. Perhaps he would have to prevent that from happening. In the grass he flew out holding the tiny wand that had now become larger. This time the cow had to hold its feet firmly to the ground. Paralyzed, the same power seemed to emanate from his eyes. Purple light enveloped the cow like a rope. It used its hind legs to quickly jump up and dodge. Everyone was surprised because it dodged Li Han's attack. They also ran to help him. 2 young men, chanting fire spells. Wait a minute, he was startled and reacted that they couldn't use fire in a place full of plants like this. Just use magic that wouldn't harm the surrounding objects. They were quite confused with Li Han's words if so. Paralyzed, they launched another attack and rushed towards the cow. It seemed that its power became weaker the closer it came into contact and then disappeared. Stunning, it did not affect it at all. It moved its tail, its whole body emitting a pale yellow light like a protective layer. He glared at them and took a deep breath. The cow didn't even pay attention to the people standing nearby. They wondered what the professor had fed it. Sienna held a box containing several potions, which were used to throw at the cow to weaken it and make it easier to deal with. Taking this, the medicine bottle burst and water rushed into the cow. It seemed to frown and breathe faster. Not only did it not weaken, it rushed towards everyone. Macon reassures everyone to calm down. Its resistance to magic has decreased, so magic should have an effect on it. Please cast a spell on it. Paralyze. A huge stream of power from 3 wands shot at it. Paralyze, paralyze, damn it. The magic gradually seeped into its body. It stopped attacking. It seemed to have worked. The cow gradually weakened and fell to the ground. It ran like crazy, rushing towards where everyone was standing. Then suddenly it rushed forward again. It could move. Get out of the way. It flew straight over the head of a purple-haired young man. Help me. Guys, Li Han witnessed his friends being injured. They won't be fine at this rate. He gritted his teeth in bitterness. Right at this moment, this critical situation had become the motivation for him to become even stronger. The magic had been activated before he even recited the spell. The wand emitted a blast of power like lightning, which in the future would become a moment that would one day be likened to a miracle that would surprise everyone. Paralyzing a rush of greater power, this small but mysterious change, in the future will become a moment that will be likened to a miracle that will surprise everyone one day. While watering the plants, suddenly there was a sound. Suddenly a question arose. What is that? A buffalo whose horns are wrapped in vines is rushing forward. Suddenly rushing in front of Li Han, it suddenly fell down without warning. He was about to attack, but unexpectedly the buffalo suddenly fell down, making him a bit surprised. Other students around were also frightened by its large body. One of them breathed a sigh of relief because he was saved. At this time, someone spoke up and asked, was he saved? Having said that, they waved their hands to thank Li Han, but at this moment he affirmed that he could not rest yet. After speaking, he held the stick firmly in his hand. The more he thought about it, the more strange it became. He felt like there was some very familiar magic present around here. He made it clear to everyone that the huge buffalo could wake up at any time because he had just knocked it unconscious. He was still quite skeptical about this place. Li Han wanted to know if there was anything magical around here when suddenly the branches next to the tree began to move, causing the surrounding ground to shake violently. He was so shocked that he stood there dumbfounded, not knowing what to do. The other students were so scared that they screamed at each other, not knowing what was going on. The sound of willow tree leaves rustling and shaking violently. The tree roots began to move closer to them. The students felt like something was coming. From the tree trunk appeared a fierce face and shouted at the people in front of him because they had desecrated this place. Seeing that the tree could talk, everyone panicked and screamed. Some people were surprised by the fact that the willow tree could talk. They were all scared and screaming. Some wanted to run away because they thought he was a monster, but Li Han calmly calmed everyone down. He stood in front of that huge tree trunk and thought to himself, this willow tree is not ordinary. He even guessed that this willow tree is the ruler here. He glanced behind him suspiciously. Then he calmly explained to him that he was just protecting Professor Euregum's tree. Yonor also echoed him to make him more confident. At this time, that willow tree was also more harmonious than before. He praised them endlessly for their efforts in protecting the tree when the professor was not present. Li Han only bowed his head in polite response. Then the willow slowly introduced himself. He was a botany professor, you could call him Willow. As soon as he finished introducing himself, he bent down to look at the fainted animal below and began to praise him. Seeing that, he also accepted the compliment and thanked the professor in front of him. This professor slowly used his vines to wrap around the animal and then explained to him that this was the cow that Professor Euregum raised, but because it was so clumsy and could not distinguish directions, it ran away naked. Seeing that, he continued to ask him if he was always taking care of the trees here. Professor, Willow slowly answered, today I was assigned the responsibility of protecting this place. Speaking of this, he began to sigh and complain to him, because Professor Euregum went to meet the king's people, so now he has to take care of this place. Hearing that, Li Han was a bit surprised. He naively said, Professor Euregum said to go to the market with Professor Thunderstep. He asked again with some doubts, but Li Han did not lie. He told him to ask Professor Thunderstep to know. Seeing that he had been tricked, he was shaking all over, trying to squeeze out every word to thank you. Then suddenly he asked him what he would like to give because he had a great contribution in killing the cow to protect the flowers and grass here. He did not hesitate to ask directly about the ingredients and reagents for performing alchemy. However, after hearing that question, he hesitated a bit and said that this place had too many dangerous things for them. Seeing that he did not succeed in his plan, he immediately decided to change to another method to convince him to reveal the ingredients. Then he scratched his head and apologized to Willow, because perhaps he was a bit greedy with this wonderful place. He slowly covered up his plan. He switched to another explanation. He said that he was also curious to see Professor Euregum's laboratory. It seemed impossible, but he agreed to his proposal, making him a little surprised and stuttering. After that, he moved to the third floor. As he walked, he told them to follow him upstairs and give them what they could use. He still didn't stop rambling. This professor even wanted to blame the cow just to help the students get the necessary things. He walked up the stairs following Professor Willow. His arm passed through the colorful barrier. Stepping through that door, everything seems to become completely different. Because there was no light in the surrounding space, Yonor was a little panicked, and he couldn't use the light spell. Seeing that they were having a bit of difficulty, Willow reminded them, then used her vines to emit light to help them go easier. In front of them was a door with a bright light coming from it. One of them was a bit surprised because it felt like something was running past. Getting closer to the door, people also began to see more light coming from the door. On the door now appears the number 6. Seeing such a situation, every one of them was surprised because it felt like the door had just jumped in front of them. The door opened inside and everything seemed completely frozen. The cold had enveloped that room. From the tables and chairs to the stairs were covered in ice. Cold air emanated from inside, covering Li Han's outer space. The light shining from inside made the professor a bit surprised. Suddenly the door was slammed shut right in front of everyone. Professor Willow believes that this laboratory should be closed permanently. Similar things happened in other laboratories. Professor Willow then summoned a few more laboratories for them. But the unfortunate thing is that the space inside those summoned doors is not reality. At this moment, there was a rustling sound because someone was taking notes. That person was Li Han, and he looked at what he wrote down just now. He seemed to understand something. He realized that the first and second floors didn't have many traps, but the third floor was carefully guarded. He closed the notebook and thought that the notes on how to summon the laboratories had been written down by him, so it might be okay to take them out and use them now. Suddenly he turned around and thought a bit. The pile of bags was tied tightly on the other side. Those were the gifts given to him when he found the professor's laboratory. He sincerely thanked Professor Willow. He thought he couldn't do anything, so there was no need to thank him, but he was still very grateful to him for letting them come to this place. He was happy because everything was going in the right direction that he had outlined before. He thought he could easily escape from here without any problems. But life at the Magic Academy is not easy, because later they all returned to their original positions, but Professor Willett reminded them that they had to water the whole garden. He looked stunned. He couldn't believe how this had happened. Before they left, the professor told them to bring back the gift bags they had received, and he would clean up this mess later. Seeing that, they thanked him and left first. He looked at the 3 flower pots in front of him and felt a bit sad because they were all withered. He picked up the watering can, which caught your attention. Seeing that Professor Willow was about to water, Li Han called out. He sincerely offered to let everyone help him clean up the rest. He now thought it was right to make a good impression on him. At this time Yoner also spoke up. She also wanted to help everyone. Her face was full of joy, saying that she was very good at this. Touched by that suggestion, he somewhat shyly raised tree branches to cover them and praised them as the excellent students he had met. Seeing that they were interested, the professor decided to give them gifts. Both of them were very curious about what he planned to give them. But the professor is still a professor, even if it's just a willow tree. Who would have thought that he would take them to a place and tell them to water the entire area? They were a bit confused. They thought they were being given a gift, but unexpectedly they were taken to another place and told to water the entire area. Before he could ask, the professor disappeared without a trace. He felt guilty and raised his hand to his head in reproach. He apologized to her and then took all the responsibility on himself. At this moment, she was holding the water bottle. She had not heard anything he said. Her face was now extremely bright and radiant. He approached and gently told her that he felt that the amount of work the professor assigned was a bit much. On the contrary, she felt that this work was quite fun. She said as she pointed towards those rare plants. Seeing that, he just sighed. He thought that at least she liked this. He finally decided to pick up the watering can. Then the 2 people started watering the gardens around this area. Behind the 2 of them there is a lake that looks very clean and cool. At this time, sunlight was shining on the lake's surface, causing air bubbles to appear on the surface of the lake. A few hours later, it seemed like they had finished their assigned work. Both of them stood up straight and warmed up their muscles. She felt like her work was done, and he agreed with her. He stood breathing rapidly but still felt sorry for her and kept apologizing in his heart. She happily wiped the sweat from her forehead and told him that she felt happy about this job. Now he felt no guilt towards her anymore, because she didn't seem to be uncomfortable at all. Having said that, the 2 of them put on their coats and decided to go home. The lake's surface is quiet right now. The silhouette of 2 people chatting happily appeared. Suddenly there was a voice. I was always observing you, young man. This made you a little confused. She was also startled by that voice. The 2 began to assume a defensive posture, and he shouted loudly to ask who the other person was. Suddenly something appeared before his eyes that made him stunned. From below the surface of the water, a drop of water floating in the air appeared. Both Li Han and Yoner stood motionless looking at that huge thing, not sure if it was an enemy or a friend. It introduced itself. Its name was Parasi, the spirit of this pond. They were surprised because they did not expect to meet a spirit who thought he was a disciple of that willow tree. They looked at each other and silently affirmed that it was definitely not dangerous to them. He was a bit surprised because he knew that professor. He also said that he had signed a contract and he was taking care of this garden. It seemed very satisfying to see young people like them taking care of the trees. He now thought that Professor Willow brought them here to work because he wanted to leave a good impression on this spirit. He happily wanted to support him because he helped him take care of this garden. He now felt a bit guilty because he was upset with the professor in the beginning. At this time, it said, it could give him the advice that he was wondering about. He was a bit surprised to hear it say that. He also honestly asked for advice on how to make friends with other spirits, because they all ran away when they saw him. It seemed a bit surprised by this question. It thought it knew what the reason was for him, because he was carrying a wood spirit with him. He explained that an oak tree had been given to him, and it seemed like he understood. It reassured him, then said that the wood spirit in the tree was also afraid of him, but it said that his nature was very good. He held that thing in his hand and was a bit confused because he didn't think it was afraid of him. She now seemed a bit worried and asked Parasi about how to let Li Han form a contract with the spirit. It calmly said that low-level spirits would run away as soon as they saw him. It continued to give advice, telling him to find a fierce and violent spirit that would suit him. He bowed his head and thanked it. Then suddenly it said things that only happened with a very low probability at this time. He felt that the advice the spirit gave was a bit unreliable. She now thought that everyone had finished talking. She boldly asked Parasi if he could make a contract with Li Han. It seemed like she really cared about him. Before her actions, he was a bit surprised. That spirit was also a bit surprised by her words. He was a little worried and told her there was no need to do that, but she seemed very determined, because opportunities were hard to find. He still tried to reassure her, but before he could finish speaking, he suddenly stopped, not knowing how to continue. Because inside he is now very embarrassed by her behavior at that time. He thought she was quite similar to the kind of kindergarten teacher who was pairing him with other friends. He spoke calmly, afraid it wouldn't work. Because it had already signed a contract with that willow tree, it couldn't sign any more. Hearing this, she was a little disappointed and he was a little less shy. Suddenly it put its hand into the pond and said with an amused expression, "If you don't want to leave empty-handed." It continued, "Let me introduce the spirit I know." Parasi thought that the character of the spirit he introduced was a bit strange, but in the end, it was still better than nothing. It told him that when he met that spirit, if he said he knew him, it would seem that the spirit would listen to what he had to say. As he spoke, he thought about that scenario and hoped that this meeting would be beneficial for him. Water drops began to rise. A large drop of water appeared above, and the two looked like they were about to crystallize together to form a block of water. After saying that, it flew up high and drained all the water from the pond. Below the pond is a large hole. There is a cave below, it said. If you go in here you will meet that spirit. He didn't expect there to be a secret passage down here. The two of them jumped down and decided to go inside. Before leaving, they didn't forget to say thank you. He was about to go inside, but suddenly he wanted two people to give him a hand. As soon as it was brought out, it shot some kind of liquid onto the two people's hands. His hand now glowed a bit, which surprised him. On the back of his hand, a mark appeared. It said that this was its power transmitted into this spell. This spell could help them there one day. Before leaving, they thanked me again. It smiled happily. Nothing. When the two entered, it did not forget to remind the two of them not to forget their love for trees. As soon as he went inside, he thought that Parasi was a spirit but was more benevolent than the other professors. The stick in his hand emitted light to let them go. At this moment, he seemed a bit nervous when he came down here. She suddenly spoke up. She thought that the spirit living in this pond did not know what would happen. He thought that perhaps it was still a water spirit and she guessed that it would live in a river or lake. Yoner seemed to wish it was a river spirit because they are very wise. Hearing her say that, Li Han had more hope of leaving this place. He thought that he would be able to gain wisdom thanks to them while at this academy. When he got there, he opened the lid and climbed up. As soon as he stepped up, he was stunned as if something shocked him. Li Han shouted loudly, "Here!" His scream made her ask in surprise. Then, Yoner also climbed up after him, and was also shocked by this scene. She suddenly screamed loudly. In front of them was the disciplinary room, which looked extremely dark and flimsy. He looked at the scene before him and made a firm assertion that he was completely not a river spirit. Yoner was a little panicked because this was the place where Li Han had been locked up. He walked inside. He checked the doors one by one and confirmed they were safe. He assumed this place was currently unused. Yoner seemed to feel more secure and decided to leave this place, while he seemed a bit doubtful. Li Han looked around but still couldn't see the exit even though there were many doors. It feels like all paths are blocked. Yoner started to feel scared of places like this. Calmly reassure her, because here he seems to have roughly grasped the surrounding structure. Remembering the time he had experienced before, Li-han led Yoner to a magical passage, where he had been before. Looking around, he felt that this place was different from before because there were no surveillance devices. He feels like he's at the end of his rope. Li-han took out his stick and decided to use magic power to create a path. He told her to stand behind him for safety. Let's start, using magic power the same way you broke open the dormitory door. Li-han gathered powerful magic to create a path. At this moment, suddenly there was a scream, "Stop now, you idiot!" He was startled and stopped. The two of them were surprised and asked who made the loud noise. That spirit had a very noble personality, so he didn't want to tell them his name, but instead asked who they were, and quickly said that Parasi had introduced them here. Continuing to explain, he said he told me to come here and there would be a spirit to make a contract with. The spirit continued to say, "They are young people, Parasi is very soft-hearted towards people like them." That spirit decided not to sign a contract with him and chased the two of them back. Yoner turned to him and thought the spirit had disappeared. Then he sullenly thought that this time he had failed again. She thought that this elf was also afraid of him, but suddenly a shrill scream rang out, "What did you say?" It reappeared to confirm that it was not afraid of him. The two of them felt relieved that it was still here. Yoner still firmly believes that it is avoiding him. Yoner continued to say that Parasi said that the spirits that met him were scared. He stood to the side feeling a bit shy and said, "That person did not say that." But in the end, he still wanted to know why that spirit rejected him. They continued, constantly asking why this spirit was avoiding him. He said hesitantly, the reason he avoided them was because he hated meaningless battles. Both of them looked at each other without saying anything. The two of them also agreed with what he said, but he was not like that. The real reason the spirit avoided you was because it had been tricked by a contract before. Because, the principal, he refused to form a contract with someone because of his great pride. But after fighting for a week, he made a contract because the principal told him to only do simple things. And the simple task it was assigned was to supervise students in the disciplinary room. But to think that the academy's students escaped so much that they fled here to avoid it. It was haunted by that, so it didn't want to make a contract, but they didn't think it would feel insulted in this way. They realized this spirit had a lot of pride. The fact that they said he was afraid offended his pride. And not happy that Li-han and Yoner doubted its power, it would show him and her a part of its power. Ask Li-han to concentrate the most magic power and convert it into an element. Laughing and asking Li-han to change into a more destructive element, he replied, "Okay." Li-han seemed serious, vowing not to let that happen again, so he concentrated as much as possible. Suddenly, Li-han was also surprised. He picked up the stick and spoke, bursting into flames. The fire burned bright red. The ashes of the fire scattered. The fire is getting bigger and bigger. It seemed, Li-han was too worried, but the magic was still stable. Then suddenly there was a flash of light. Li-han himself held the torch with that light. Yoner standing next to him was also surprised. Shocked because he couldn't believe that Li-han could summon such a large lightning bolt in this place, and I don't understand what's going on. Both of them seemed to be having a lot of fun. She suddenly noticed and asked him what he was doing. He thought the letter K in his head, then rays of light shone around. He screamed and couldn't believe it. Even so, elemental transformation failed. Elemental transformation was an ability that spirits who didn't want to show off showed off, and transformed. And having the ability to interfere with magic and elements, that was a way to prove strength. Li-han sighed and wondered what was going on. It was frustrated that it could easily deal with elements, but couldn't transform fire magic. Was it thinking, or was there something special about magic? It discovered something and screamed, "No way." It looks normal on the outside, but inside it hides magic power. As if seeing the dragon's fire itself, a thought flashed, did this young mage create that fire? Li-han bewilderedly asked himself, did he just release lightning? This would be extremely dangerous. He still stood in front looking at the lightning spirit. Thunder Spirit believes that the magical abilities of young magicians are very weak, like a child holding a bomb. However, he wondered how Li-han had so much mana. It's not just this punishment room. But they themselves will be in danger, followed by the image of Li-han and Yoner lying in a fire. Every ray of light flashed again. The lightning spirit thought, this is no longer a matter of self-esteem. He whispered, I need to destroy the magic before he panics. On the one hand, Li-han told Yoner that the lightning was very cool and wanted it to open the way. Then asked if anyone could pave the way for us. Don't, angry spirit, don't move your staff. Li-han was bewildered, not understanding what it had to do with the stick, and he shouted, not to move. Both he and Yoner seemed to not understand anything. He pondered whether he should tell him that it was dangerous or not, for fear that he would be surprised and the fire might explode. Therefore, the thunder spirit expressed his attitude that he did not like others waving sticks in front of him. Looks like Yoner has some idea. He thought about how to destroy that magic. Li-han's weak ability to control magic could not be easily destroyed. The thunder spirit imagined, and if Li-han panicked before the magic was destroyed, an explosion would occur. He thought that there was no other way, so he had to try. Turning to Li-han and saying that he had changed his mind, Li-han, even though he didn't understand what was going on, still replied yes. Then asked to make a contract with Li-han. Li-han didn't understand why he changed his attitude 180 and why he changed his mind. The thunder spirit changed his mind because he saw his ability. Knowing that Li-han's mana is so great that other magicians can hardly match it. Urge Li-han to hurry up and make a contract. You never know when that fire will flare up. Yoner looked suspiciously and didn't know what he would do. Li-han only focused on thinking it would be a special spirit because Farakas had suggested it. Li-han wondered again that his mind was a bit suspicious, pulled the spirit that wanted to make a contract with Li-han and urged him to hurry up. Then he sighed. After all, he wasn't in a position to be picky, so he decided to make a contract. He happily thought that Li-han made the right decision. The contract begins, open your soul and accept me. Li-han continued and acknowledged him as his partner. And you have the right to summon me, so remember this well. However, he did not forget to warn Li-han that he was neither his servant nor his master. Li-han seemed to know something. It turned out its identity was. He closed his eyes and thought. A lightning scar appeared on his forehead. Li-han still stood still. Loi Chim, a sentence rang out, waking him up. He thought it was dragging, so this was probably the reason why his mind was unstable. The thunder spirit had made a contract with him, so he sensed the doubts in his mind and warned Li-han not to go too far. Yoner walked over. You've made the contract, Li-han, congratulations. Li-han replied, thank you. Interrupting the conversation, saying it wasn't important, showed true power. After saying that, he took the wooden stick. Li-han thought, it went into my arm, so far, it feels so good. Thunder spirited, I will help you control it, and shout and ask you to release that fire quickly, right now. You still don't understand anything here. The fire began to go out. Li-han thought to himself, it seemed like he was in a hurry. The thunder spirit's voice once again turned his attention. There you are, don't you know how dangerous what just happened? The angry spirit shouted loudly, and questioned why he used such terrible mana. With that much mana, this whole room will soon be burned to ashes. The lightning spirit continued speaking. Li-han held a magical wooden staff in his hand, because he himself didn't know what was going on, but it seemed very dangerous. His face was gloomy, thinking that his current fire magic was beyond his ability. The lightning spirit said he was a powerful but young magician. The thunder spirit kindly asked if you were okay. The sun is already rising, the lightning spirit subconsciously reminded him. Don't you guys have to go to school, making Yoner and Li-han startled. Li-han stammered, no. It's just that now they have basic imperial geometry and arithmetic, as well as submitting homework, so when they were reminded of it again, their faces turned as pale as banana leaves. Li-han shuddered as he remembered Professor Morton's last class. Remembering it, he secretly felt lucky because he had done his homework and wouldn't be able to submit it late. Suddenly Li-han looked up and asked Mr. Perchuntra to please lead him out of here. Perchuntra heard that and stopped talking because he couldn't do it. When Li-han and Yoner heard that, their faces were filled with disappointment. Because I had made a contract to protect this place, said the spirit. He frowned and thought, even if he helps, I'm not sure if I'll be able to get to class on time. Li-han was so angry that he shouted, oh my god, how could you help me? Why did you even make a contract with me? Yoner thought he was crazy, a graduate student afraid of submitting his homework late. Being stuck in the punishment room is another matter. Wait until you get out of here, summon me again and I will prove my true bravery to you. Now I can only open the blocked path for you. I can't leave here, just recite the sealing spell here, and with that the door leading out will open. He put his hands on his hips and took a light breath. Puff, okay. Seal here for a moment, then the chain and lock appear. Then the lock tight. He turned around, grabbed Yoner's hand. Let's go, she replied. Okay. Wait until the two are about to leave. Drag the speaking spirit after you. Wait until you go out and don't forget to summon me. My bravery is much better than this. On this side, Leehan and Yoner are speeding out. A white sheet of paper is placed on the ground. A line of pen is placed on paper. Both of them looked at the map together, but it seemed like everywhere they went was a dead end. Leehan was surprised to see a skeletal hand. He asked, "Are you guys looking for a way?" It wiggled and shook its head. Leehan was helpless. Okay, then. Looking at the map, everywhere you see architecture like ant nests, it is difficult to escape. He ordered to check the hallway on this side, because the two of them were wasting their time. Look at the wall making noise. Next, a voice appeared at a door. Are you guys looking for a way out of here? Leehan slowly approached. He thought to himself that there must be someone in the prison and asked, "Who is it?" The other person heard his voice and was a little surprised, recognizing this voice. Ask Leehan, aren't you that new student who was caught after escaping from the basement? She was a senior who was arrested for stealing from the principal's warehouse. What mistake did she make this time? Leehan placed his hand on the door and asked back. Yoner came closer from behind. Who was she? When I was locked in the punishment room, this senior was in the room next to mine. The skeleton slowly approached. He didn't pay attention here. The person inside also said, "The way out, it's not easy to find." Its skeletal hand prodded Leehan's body. Leehan waved his hand away, waiting for me. Then it just left. It ran back to its bones. The small parts begin to connect to form the complete piece. Then run towards both of them. Why should I tell you? The senior inside said. The guy on the outside thought to himself, this time I don't have anything to convince her. The skeleton was still clinging to his shirt. This time he turned around and was ready to get angry. I told him that before he finished speaking. Mr. Leehan suddenly stopped. He widened his eyes in surprise. Look at the skeleton in front, which is the hand. Which is the leg? A very complete animal. It raised its neck up. Then Yoner screamed loudly, "Monster!" Leehan next to her stopped her. Wait to calm down. It thought it had summoned it. He bent down to its level and asked, "Is this human skeleton a leopard? Did you reassemble this skeleton yourself?" It nodded. "I think this is good again." "Okay, so we need to find the bone hidden in the punishment room," he said. Hearing him say that, the inside suddenly asked, "Wait, what?" The senior inside spoke out. "You said you summoned a skeleton. Did you accidentally learn black magic from Professor Morton? So what's the matter?" he said. That hand remained on the door. The person inside put the letter through the slot and told him to take it. "You asked for directions out, right? Good luck," the senior said. Leehan turned pale and thought, why did I not feel happy after taking this map, and said thank you. Finally, Leehan said to Yoner, "Let's go." Then he quickly continued, "We're leaving, let's go." She still stood there silently. Inside, the senior looked through the door and thought to himself, a first-year student learning black magic. I have to meet him later. Sunlight began to filter through the school. There were a few students there who were bored and tired from today's class. They bowed their heads to thank the professor for today's lecture. Leehan and Yoner observed everything. He sighed with a tense expression and looked his head in. Inside the room, he saw the professor collecting all the homework and he thought it was too late. The lecture was over. Yoner is so worried out here. What about your cards? He secretly thought that this professor didn't take attendance, but if he submitted his assignment now, the professor would definitely say things like, "You guys didn't even bother to come to listen to the lecture." Then he would continue to say, "Why would I have to waste his time? Looking through your homework is not time conscious." Yoner suddenly called out to Leehan, "Let's go." He reached out and pulled out the magic wand from his pocket. She was startled, not knowing what was happening, and tried to restrain him, because he could not attack the professor. Leehan was confused, looked at her and said, "Over there, I have no intention of doing that." "Because you're aiming for the pile of homework." And about to put both of their cards in the pile of paper, Yoner asked with an incredulous expression if he could do that. Leehan reached out to pick up the exercise book. Of course he could, and he would throw it in there right away. He calmly stood in front of the pile of homework, completely prepared. All the troubles I went through because of my professor were this moment. He raised the tip of his stick, tilted it towards the stack of papers and shouted loudly, "Get out of the way." Yoner stood next to him, watching with only admiring eyes. He did elementary control magic. It looked so easy. Lihan was truly outstanding. Hold the stick firmly in your hand. He raised it high and thought, simply put them in the stack of papers and not be detected. Then, close your eyes tightly. Suddenly there was a silhouette, briefly behind him, whispering in his ear that he was concentrating. Lihan was stunned for a moment. Then he opened his eyes wide in panic, thinking that he had encountered too many things and had hallucinations. Suddenly, he heard Professor Validi's voice. A voice came from behind. It was just a simple operation like stuffing paper into a stack of papers, but... Lihan turned around to look. He actually didn't hear wrongly. It was Professor Validi's voice. He crossed his arms and told you, "Why are you looking this way? Let's concentrate." Hearing that, both of them turned pale and thought that besides meeting the professor unluckily, who was the professor standing next to them? He had yellow hair, one hand was raised to his chin with a judgmental expression, but there was a barrier around the target, right? As soon as he touches the barrier, he will immediately report back. Although it is invisible, it is quite fragile and meticulous. He raised his stick and pointed in the other direction, making the stack of books float. He hesitated in thought, a barrier. Then looking closely at the stack of books in front of him, he whispered, now that he looks closely, he can see a little. If he could see it, 2 books were flying in the air. The 2 professors were still discussing because they couldn't surpass him. He tried his best and thought, I can do it. 2 books were flying towards the stack of books. Just fly straight there. Finally, 2 books fell down. In the end, his and Yoner's 2 books lay peacefully there. Returning to the staircase scene, it's a bit murky. Lihan's charismatic and confident face is still clearly visible. Seeing Yoner and Lihan talking, the 2 professors were surprised by something. Because of such a thin barrier, it is possible to notify him if he makes a small mistake. It's unbelievable. How could he do that? The blonde professor exclaimed. Professor Validi immediately replied that it was only because he had learned the lesson, but he still politely thanked him. The blonde professor came up to talk to him, and acknowledged that he was too good to be just under his school and that his name was Wodanas. He also introduced himself as Professor Kermanchu, who teaches magic. His specialty is magic barriers. And he offered to shake hands, but he advised against shaking hands because of race. You think I'm under illusion magic, but I have to maintain my image. And surely you will meet him in the lecture, and teach you interesting things about illusions. Professor Validi on this side was thoughtful. Because he thought illusions were useless, magicians, once they reached a certain level, would not be fooled. Li Han was surprised that the professor had just spit on someone else's strengths in front of them. The atmosphere was definitely gloomy. Kermichu did not forget to ask more. Why just now he wanted to try to insert paper into the stack of papers through the barrier. He was surprised why the professor did not pay attention. He must have gotten used to it. Li Han scratched his head in embarrassment because they submitted their homework late. Professor Kermi asked, "Did you do that just for a small assignment?" And laughed at him, because he was truly a magician who worked hard. If it were me, he wouldn't have bothered to do the assigned work in the first place. He wondered, why is that? Because of Professor Alphen Knighton, a voice spoke up. Professor Validi continued, being a high-ranking manager for the Empire, better at abusing power than magic. Kermi told him that in order to expand, he cut research fees in half, and so did Professor Vodali. The cautious sentence means that the professor used to be a manager. Then you need to maintain your image first. This person's face, Li Han thought to himself. And Kermi advised him to be careful, otherwise he would become an imperial official. Professor Validi, he seriously told Kermi that's enough joking. There's no way Li Han would choose a lowly path that doesn't involve magic. Seeing the 2 professors talking, I could only stand still and watch. He looked in the mirror and told himself he should just hide. Because your dream is to be a manager for the Empire. One beautiful morning, staying at the tall tower, Yoner breathed heavily because he was finally back. And suggested calling everyone down to share. What a coincidence, he said after seeing everyone gathering over there. Li Han quickly asked, everyone did it yesterday, but before he could finish the sentence, his friend Deshan Dalkard suddenly turned around and asked if he was home. She grabbed his shoulder tightly, because there was a big problem and she needed your help. Durgu and Gainando were taken away, she shouted loudly. Hearing Ashan Dalkard scream, the group of students rushed over like the wind. Wardanas looked at the scene for a moment to grasp the situation. Ashan Dalkard recounted the incident when they finished class and returned. A monster was summoned and attacked the group. Most of them were able to escape, but Guy Nandu tripped and fell. After that unlucky stumble, the monster took the opportunity to use its plant tendrils to wrap around Guy Nandu's legs, causing him to be controlled and unable to run away. Wardanas clearly understood the situation. So why was Durgu also arrested? Wardanas asked. It was because he tried to save Guy Nandu. The answer couldn't have made Wardanas more disappointed. Durgu, you're really unlucky. All the students were confused by the situation of their two friends being taken away by monsters. They discussed asking each other for help from the professor because they were near the main building. Ashan Dalkard was on the side listening. See. The monk students have arrived. Everyone is looking forward to it. It seems like they have just tried to seek a favor from the professors. How is it? Will he go save Durgu? Responding to the students' expectations was a disappointed face from the tower student. The teacher said, "Solve it yourself." As soon as the sentence ended, both friends were in despair as if they had just fallen into the abyss. The students were confused and speechless. Everyone was worried about Guy Nandu and Durgu. They were trying to figure out how to solve this problem. In contrast to the troubled faces of their friends, Wardanas sighed. I immediately knew something like this would happen. Well, maybe you're no stranger to these troubles. But because the male lead's aura never fades, Wardanas becomes the enlightener for his friends. He suddenly flashes an idea. I guess that's the mark left by the monster, Wardanas thought to himself when he found a clue nearby, a groove scratching deep into the ground, creating a long, winding trail. Wardanas pointed towards the monster's path. Things have come to this, we can only follow the traces they left behind. This is the only way we can find the next clue ourselves and rescue them. Master, if you want to save Durgu, come with us, Wardanas suggested to the students before leaving. The two monk students seemed uncomfortable with Wardanas's recent proposal because they felt they were being asked to be his minions, but because they also wanted to save Durgu, they had no choice but to agree, follow Wardanas. The students were excited about their upcoming challenge. They began to become more determined and united to solve the problem at hand. They all tried to rescue Guy Nandu and Durgu. They didn't miss a single moment. The blue-haired student with a face full of forced resignation, Wardanas, we can do it. It will be okay, Wardanas answered confidently and firmly. If the professor doesn't want to help, we'll have to find another way, Wardanas said complacently, determination shining in his eyes.